Akadosh Erev Tov Masechet Ketubot Daf Daled Amud Aleph 34a1 says the Gemara Rabbi Shimon he. What are we talking about? We were asking who is the Chachamim in which are mentioned in the Braita that we say over here Rabbi Shimon he. What does that mean? This Braita is going according to Rabbi Shimon. The Amar that they say that Shchita Shenuria Lo Shchita. If you do a Shechita, but you cannot eat from that shechita, so therefore it's not considered a shechita. And therefore, even though they came and they did a shechita, whether it's going to be for the avodah zarah or the shor niskal, which are asurim bana, it's not considered mutar with the shechita. And therefore, the chachamim come and they hold that the shchitat of ganav is not considered a shechita, and therefore he's patur from paying tashlumi arba v'chamisha. But Rabbi Meir, that he argues, says no. Even though the shechita is not ruya, it's still considered shechita. Shechita is a shechita. They did the shechita. You care? You think I care what's going to happen afterwards to the animal? What you do with the animal? You did the shechita, right? That's the way it is, right? That's the main thing. I understand if you're going to do that you're doing shechita for avodah zarah or avashar niskal. Remember, the avodah zarah means you're doing it for an avodah zarah. That automatically becomes a surbana. You're doing something for avodah zarah. You're not allowed to benefit from it. The second one is going to be what? Shor niskal. Shor niskal is a shor that comes and it gores and it kills. So we know that the first three times it's going to be mishalem chetzi nezik, then it's mishalem nezik shalem, and then all of a sudden what happens if it's going to come and it's going to kill? So now what happens is you kill this animal. That's called shor niskal. So shor niskal, you're not allowed to benefit from it. So therefore, these two things I understand. But shchita b'Shabbat, shchita ruya. One second, but it's not the shchita on Shabbat. It's a good shchita. Tetzrav, as we learned in the Mishnah in Chulin. If somebody comes and he does shechita on Shabbat or Kippur, even though he's chayav mita on Shabbat and karet on Kippur, because he went and he actually did this, but the shechita is still a good shechita. So what are we talking about then? What is the case? So says the Gemara, he holds like Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar. Why? Because according to Shitat Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar, if somebody is going to shochet b'mezid, so then you're not allowed to come and you're not allowed to eat it le'olam, forever and ever. So therefore a ganav that he came and he was tavach b'Shabbat through a shaliach, he's patur from paying tashlumi arba v'chamisha, because even though it's a shchita she'neruya, the Tanya, but we learned in a Braita. Now we're going to have here three shitot. These three shitot are also brought down in Masechet Shabbat. When it's brought down in Masechet Shabbat, if you remember, we learned this already in Shabbat, and this is halacha l'maaseh. We're not going to paskin like Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar. We're going to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. There's a whole question about Rabbi Meir and B'diavad. There's Shatadachak. There's a Gaon. There's a Mishnah Berurah. But wait 1 second. Let's put on a seatbelt. The Tanya, as we learned in a Braita, Hamvashel b'Shabbat. Somebody that comes and he cooks on Shabbat. Bishogeg, if he did it accidentally, so then yochal. He's allowed to actually eat from the food. And even on Shabbat, he's allowed to eat from the food. Okay? B'mezid, if he did it purposely, lo yochel, he's not allowed to eat it. Right? Here it says he's not allowed to eat it whatsoever, but other people are allowed to eat it b'Shabbat etzma. In that same Shabbat, they're allowed to eat it, but for him, le'olam. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Divrei Rabbi Meir. So one more time. Beshogeg beteavon. Bon appetit. Bemezid asur lo leolam. La'acherim mutar b'Shabbat atzma. That is the shita of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda. What about the second rabbi? Now remember that every time that we're going to bring another group, we shift one forward. So which you're going to understand now in 1 second. That's what Tosafot says. Pay attention. Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says, if you do it b'shogeg, now you're going to eat it motzai Shabbat. You cannot eat it on Shabbat itself because you can't benefit from the Shabbat, but you could eat it on motzai Shabbat. Okay, and that it doesn't matter, right? That's what it says over here. Here it says, what does it mean? For him, he could eat it motzai Shabbat. Okay, but for other people, they could eat it even on the Shabbat. Okay, even on the same Shabbat, they could eat it. Now, b'mezid, if it's going to be b'mezid, which means purposely, now lo yochal olamit, he cannot eat it forever. But somebody else could eat it motzei Shabbat. So therefore, right, we're going one case stringent. Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar, which is going to be now the next one. Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar omer, b'shogeg ya'achel lemotzei Shabbat. Right, on shogeg you could eat it on motzei Shabbat. La'acherim, only for other people. Velolo, but not for him. B'mezid, if it's going to be on purpose, lo ya'achel olami, lo, nobody can. So, bichlal. So basically, what do we just do? We just put it into perspective, and that's the chart that you have there in the bottom. If you pay attention, right, you have there the Rabbi Meir, right, and then you have there, right, the how do you call it? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yochanan, Salad. If you pay attention, right, in every single one, always the chumra of Rabbi Meir is going to be the kula, right, of Rabbi Yehuda, and the chumra of Rabbi Yehuda is going to be the kula of Rabbi Yochanan Sanlan. That's Tosafot that says. Okay? What's the reasoning of Rabbi Yochanan Sanlan? Why is he oser ba'achila something that was done with Shabbat b'mezid leolam? So he says, because just like Rabbi made the drasha on the entrance of the Benesia, it says, Ushmartem et Shabbat ki kodesh ilachem. What does that mean? The pasuk comes and is calling Shabbat kodesh. So what are we learning? That it's called like a din of kodesh. Mak kodesh, just like kodesh, you're not allowed to eat kodesh. Kodesh is only, the from the korbanot and everything has to be a kohen, has to be this, has to be bitara. Af maaseh Shabbat asurim ba'achila. So Rabbi Yochanan Sanal comes and he says, once it's done on Shabbat, it's like kodesh. Kodesh, are you allowed to eat kodesh? You're not allowed to eat kodesh. So therefore, you're not allowed to eat this as well. Okay? This is the shita of Rabbi Yochanan Sanal. Remember, we don't pass like Rabbi Yochanan Sanal. We pass him like Rabbi Yehuda, and then B'shata Dachak like Rabbi Meir, even though there's going to be a gaon and everything, that maybe we always go like Rabbi Meir. Okay? Yeah. Says now the Gemara, Ima Kodesh, 1 second, but Ima Kodesh Asur Bana, Af Maaseh Shabbat Asur Bana. You're not allowed to benefit from Kodesh. Right? Something that was on the Mizbeach, you're not allowed to benefit from it. If not, it's called Milah. You're not allowed to benefit from that. So therefore, if you're already going to tell me, listen, you're not allowed to eat it, because just like Kodesh, you can't eat it, so too, yeah. So you can't benefit from it either. And it says over here, so what? Maaseh Shabbat is going to be a subana. That means you're not allowed to sell it to a goy or to give it to a goy. Tamunomar comes teach you ki kodeshi lachem, for you guys, which means that Maaseh Shabbat is only for you, that you're not allowed to have the the concept of the benefiting from it, but you're allowed to sell it to a goy or to give it to a goy. So says the Gemara, Yachol afilu b'shogeg. Okay, so I would have thought to say that also b'shogeg you're not allowed to eat it, just like kodesh. What are you talking about? When you're doing it purposely, when you're doing it b'mezid amarti lecha, that's the only time when you're going to get motimat. Not if you do it by accident. There's a machlok between Ravacha and Ravina. One of them says Maseh Shabbat is doraita, which means there's a machloket between here the acharonim. What exactly is Maseh Shabbat? Is Maseh Shabbat an isur doraita, or is it an isur derabanan? There's a Gemara Pesachim that speaks about it. So man da'amar, which the usage of it, exactly. So he comes and he says like this. So man da'amar doraita, according to the man da'amar that says that the Maseh Shabbat is going to be doraita, it's kedamram. Now it makes sense. Rabbi Yochanan Sadat, he says it's doraita. You have to be careful. Gamarnu, right? There's nothing what to talk about. But according to the man da'amar that it's terabanan, amar ka, the pasuk says ushmat neshba ki kodeshi, he kodesh, ve'en Maseh kodesh, which means only Shabbat is holy in itself, but an action which is done on Shabbat, which means the Maseh, which is done on Shabbat, is not Kodesh. So you can't learn from that pasuk that anything which was done on Shabbat, you're not allowed to eat it like Kodesh. The Shabbat itself is Kodesh, not Maaseh. Manda Amar de Rabbanan, but according to the Manda Amar, that he says it's Rabbanan, my tamu de Rabbanan Patris. So then what's the reasoning why the Rabbanan come and they say that a Ganav is going to be patur from Tashumei Arba v'Chamisha when he did Shechita, Lidei Shliach? Why would he be patur? It should be Chayav. It was a good Shechita. So he says, no, you're right. Kika patre Rabbanan. When do the rabbis say that somebody is going to be patur from Tashumei Arba v'Chamisha? Ashara. On the other cases which are brought down in the Braita to do with for Avodah Zarah and Shor and Iskal, but not on Shabbat. If a person comes and he steals the animal, and then his shliach came and he did the shechita on Shabbat, and then he went and he took care of the rest of the animal, he is going to be chayav arba v'chamisha. When is he going to be patur? Only in the ashara, in the other cases, which was the case of Avodah Zarah and Shor and Iskal, that it wasn't going to be a good shechita. Toveach lavodah kochavim, says the Gemara. 1 second. If a person is going to come and he's going to do tficha, he's going to slaughter the animal for avodah kochavim. 1 second. How is it that? Why is it that Rabbi Meir is going to come and say he's going to pay back 4 and 5 times? Kevan de shachat bepurta itzale. The second that he comes and he starts doing the shchita, right? It already becomes a sur bana, right? Because remember, even the shochet any amount, he's already a sur for avodah zarah, and it's a sur bana. So idach ki katavach. So now when the other one comes and he finishes the simanim, lav de mane katavach, it doesn't belong to the owner. Meaning like this, he starts doing the shchita. Remember, shchita has to be rov shnayim, right? He starts the shchita. The second that he starts cutting part of the first siman, there are two simanim, right? There are two, the esophagus and the trachea, right? There are two pipes, the windpipe and the food pipe. So now, the second he starts cutting one of them, it's already not the owners anymore. It's already Avodah Zarah. Because since he was doing it for Avodah Zarah, it already belongs to Avodah Zarah. No. But even if he continues, the second that he started cutting it, it's already Avodah Zarah. The second it's Avodah Zarah, Asur Bana. It's Asur Bana, it's not his. So if it's not his, even when he comes and he finishes the second one, he didn't do it for the master, right? Because the master didn't belong to him anymore. So therefore, why in the world would it be Chayav? Amar Rava says, Be'omer bigmar zebicha Yehuda. He says, no. At the time of the Shechita, you're right, he didn't do it for Avodah Zarah. It's only thought about it at the end, meaning when he finished the Shechita, now he comes and he says that it's going to be for Avodah Zarah, but not the beginning, because you're right. If it was done at the beginning, it would have been his. Fine. So says the Gemara, what about Shor Niskal? The same thing. Shor Niskal, it's supposed to be already stoned, which means it's a Surbana. The second that he comes and he starts doing Shechita, right? Why would he be Chayav? At the end of the day, it's not his shore. It's not his. So Amar Rabba says, what are we dealing with? What happened was you went and you gave it to a shomer. Yeah, you went and you gave it to a guardsman. You were going out of town. Yeah, so what did you do? You come and you give your shore to somebody to take care of them. What happened? He comes and he killed a human being when he was in the house of the shomer, in the house of the guard, right? Now what happens? Nigmar dineh bevet shomer. Yeah, he murdered. He didn't damage, right? No accident, and he murdered, right? So now what happens? He comes now, and it's nigmar din bevet shomer. The nigmar din, there was a verdict, was also taken into account when it was in the house of the shomer. So this entire time, it was in the house of the guardsman. The entire time, the shore. It's my shore, but it was in the house of the guardsman. It went, the entire time it was in his house. Now what happens? Right? It says over here, nigmar din bevet shomer, right? Ugnavo ganav mi bet shomer. Somebody stole it from the house of the shomer. So what happens? So now according to Rabbi Meir, he says that a ganav is going to be chayav chamisha, even though it wasn't worth anything at the time of the shechita. But remember, according to Rabbi Meir, even though you did shechita and it wasn't ruya, you're still going to be chayav. It was only according to Chachamim that you're going to be patur. But according to Rabbi Meir, you're going to be chayav. So he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon. What? Sav like Rabbi Yaakov daman. He holds like Rabbi Yaakov that he says, af keshnigmar dino, even after nigmar din, hechsiro shomer lebaalav muchzar. You know what happens? This guy was watching over the shore for him. What happens is he finishes his watching position. He comes and he gives it back to the owner. And now he says, it's yours. Now the owner is going to say, wait a minute. My ox, you were watching it. It gored. It killed. It's chayav mita now. It becomes a shor niskal. And now you're giving him back to me like this, like like that. That's what Rabbi Yaakov. No, it doesn't go into it. It doesn't go into because there's no. It also holds, because remember, he says that Rabbi Meir held like Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon. Savalak Rabbi Shimon, he holds like Rabbi Shimon. What does that mean? Something which is poter achrayut, to pay money, which means if it's going to exempt somebody from paying money, it's in itself, it's considered money. So therefore, if the shomer would have given back the shor niskal to the owners, he wouldn't have needed to pay anything, just like Rabbi Yaakov. So now that it was stolen, the shomer has to pay back the money to the owners. And therefore, the shor niskal is causing money, right? Because remember, now that the shor niskal ran away, now I have nothing to give back anymore. Yeah, it's like somebody bought a bottle of milk and it went off. As long as he has a bottle of milk that he can return to the store, he'll get his money back. But if now somebody came and they threw out the milk, so now what? He's going to bring an empty bottle to the store? Yeah, this was bad milk, right? And it was your fault. Now you can't do anything. So same thing. The shor niskal, as long as he could have taken the shor and give it back to the owner, so then it would have been okay. The second now that the shor disappeared because it was stolen, so now all of a sudden now this guy has to come, the shomer has to come and he has to pay. So therefore that's what he says, that the Shimon, the shor is considered money. So therefore if somebody is going to steal a shor niskal from the property and he's going to do tevicha, so even though it's a surbana during the time of the shita, he's still going to be still considered money, and he's chayav in the tashumin of arba v'chamisha. Chamisha because it's a shor. Okay? Rabba Amar. Rabba now comes and he says, Le'olam, really be'emet, we could explain the words of Rabbi Meir in the Braita, betoveach al yidei atzmo. Not that he was doing the shchita through somebody else, but rather through he himself. Okay, Lamedala Damubet, 34b. Rabbi Meir, lokeu mishalem itle. If you remember, we already learned this on yesterday's daf, that Rabbi Meir is the one that holds that you get lashes and you could pay, meaning you could get double penalties. That was all the Mishnayot there in Makot and everything. Lokeu mishalem. Umet mishalem lele, but he does not hold of death and money, monetary compensation, which means According to Rabbi Meir, a person can get lashes and also pay back money, but he cannot get dye and pay back money. Shane Hanis. So now here it's different in the case of that somebody that steals and does shchita on Shabbat or for Avodah Zarah, because Rabbi Meir is going to obligate the 4 and 5 times, even though he's chayav mita on the shchita, because it's different from other types of money. Because the tashlumei avarba v'chamisha that he's going to be chayav is a knas of the Torah, and in a knas, Rabbi Meir never said that a person would die and not pay back. Why? The chidushu shechidsha Torah b'knas. It's a chidush. The Torah came and said that he has to pay a knas because al pi gidrat Torah and dinei mamonot, he should have been patur. Right? He should have been exempt. So since the Torah comes and it says no, they're really be'emet, because here, think about it. Usually, never in the Torah do you find that you have to pay back more than what you really damaged. Whenever you damage something, you usually pay back the exact amount. It doesn't exist to pay back more. Here, there's a chidush that you have to pay back kefil, double by stealing, and arba v'chamisha 4 and 5 times by the short and the chamor and all these things. But usually, you would not do that. You understand? So therefore, what's going on is that since it's a chidush that the Torah chidsha, so therefore, ve'afagav the miktal, that even though now he's chayav mita, meshalem, he should still pay. That means like this: lokeu meshalem, yes. Lashes and paying, yes. Death and paying, no. But this is a chidush. Why is it a chidush? Because since the Torah chidsha that there's a knas, so therefore here you always get the knas, even though the person will be chayav the death penalty. The Azar Rabba letamen, Rabba goes according to his reasoning. The Amar Rabba, as Rabba says, Haya gedi genuvlo. Imagine right now a person had a gedi, right? This kid, right? The kid is the son of the sheep. Yeah. So he says the son of the goat. Now what happens is this gedi was stolen before Shabbat, and it's in his hands. And now he did the shchita on Shabbat. What? No, but the gedi was already in his possessions before Shabbat, lifnei Shabbat, right? Utvacho beshabbat. And he did the shchita on Shabbat. Yeah? Chayav. He's going to be chayav. Why? Shekvar nitchayev begneva kodem shevol lidei sur Shabbat. One more time, that's what you have to say. It was before the Shabbat. And that's what Rashi says. The reason why is very simple. We always said that it has to be that it comes at the same time in order to say Kimlev Derabamina. Kimlev Derabamina means we always give the more stringent punishment. But that has to be at the same time. But if it's not going to be at the same time, which means that first came one of the averot before the second Avirah, so now you will be obligated both together. So therefore he comes and he says, since the guy stole Erev Shabbat, he was already chayav on the Geneva on Erev Shabbat. When did he do the Tvicha? On Shabbat in itself. He slaughtered on Shabbat in itself. So therefore he's going to be chayav also for paying the monetary compensation. Why? Because he's already going to be chayav on the Geneva even before he came to the Yisur of the Shabbat. Now what happens? If he stole on the Shabbat itself, which means ganav v'tavach b'Shabbat. Now he did both on Shabbat, meaning he stole and slaughtered on the Shabbat. It both happened at the same time, right? Which means that he took it from the Shuta Yachid to the Shuta Rabbi, and that's where he did the shchita. Now he's going to be patur. Shim en gneva en tvicha mechila. But if there's no gneva, which means the gneva is mechayev, right? The principle, correct? Now he says if there's no gneva, there's no the bava chamisha. So therefore, en tvicha v'mechila. So because of that, he says even though there's no mita protected to be nekras, nevertheless in this case, since there's no obligation of the keren, right? There's no principle to be paid. Because since at the end of the day it was happened on Shabbat, he's going to be patur. So therefore, since there's no principle, there's no 4 or 5 times. Because it's not going to be 3 or 4 times. It has to be dafka 4 or 5 times. Part of it is the principle, the kefel, and then the arba v'chamisha, right? So therefore, it's always going to be, has to be all together. Okay? The Amar Rabba, and Rabba says, Haya gedi ganuv lo utvacho b'machteret. What happens now if he stole, right, from the house of the Baalim, but then he went and he did the shechita in the machteret. Remember, the machteret was like to the backyard. It was like underneath the house that he used to come in order to break into the house. So he's going to be chayav. Why? Right? Because shekvar nitchayev v'gneva kol mishavol l'dei yisur b'machteret. Again, here, right, this is he made like a tunnel, right? He made the tunnel underneath the house. So therefore, what happened? He was going to be chayav in the gneva before he was the yisur of the machteret, which because of kim nevi. But if he did everything in the machteret, he's going to be patur, shimena geneva and tvicha mechila, the same thing. Utzricha. Now we need both cases. We needed the first case, which was the concept of ganav v'tavach on Shabbat and ganav v'tavach b'machteret. Why exactly? So he comes and he says, why do we need both? He comes and he says like this. He says, the iyashvinam b'Shabbat, as if we only had the first case, which was to do with the case of Rabbah teaching us to do the Shabbat. Mishum the Yisura Yisur Olam. The Yisur of Shabbat is for everybody. anybody that's mechalel Shabbat b'mezid, and they give him atra, he's going to be killed. Mechalel Shabbat, right? They come and they kill him, and that's it. And this mita, this death penalty, is so strict, it's going to be poter from any monetary compensations. But b'machteret, the isu shahi. B'machteret, what's the case of the machteret? Remember, the case of machteret is im b'ma machteret, right? V'yimatzeh haganav v'ukav en lo damim. Right? What does that mean? If you right now come and you find somebody, right? We call this the Murphy law, or stand your ground, right? What does that mean? That means, right, like what we do here in Florida, not in other places, but in Florida we have it. Yeah, what does that mean? That means that you're allowed to protect yourself. You see somebody coming from the back door, shoot him, right? Do whatever you want. Why? You're allowed to protect yourself. So you're allowed to do whatever you want in order to protect yourself. So stand your ground. So here it comes and it says, that the Isur of Machteret is only for the Isur of Shah. You could only kill him when he's inside the Machteret, but not afterwards. Right? Machteret, the Isur Sha'ahu, it's only going to be an Isur Shah, even though I would say, you're not going to say it. Why? Because this is a Mitah Kala that he could exempt himself so quickly. But if you're now going to tell me only the deen of the Machteret, I would have said that only if you're going to be stealing and you're going to do the Shkita and then you're going to be Patum Tashmin, because the Machteret itself is Atra. Meaning you don't have to warn anybody when he's already in the Machteret. If he's already in this tunnel going into your house, it means that you don't have to warn him. That is his warning. So you don't have to warn him, by the way, I'm going to shoot to kill. You don't have to do that. Right? You do it. Come on, and say Kaddish afterwards. Right? That's all you have to do. Aval b'Shabbat, by Shabbat, you need atra. What does it mean, atra? Right? You need for Shabbat. You have to come and you have to warn. Elmaleh, I would say that you're not. And therefore, we're not going to say Kim Rabbi in such a case. Right? So he comes and he says, Sricha, and therefore you need both cases. But somebody that's going to be Gonev, whether it's a Machteret on Shabbat, he's going to be Patur Mitashumim because of Kim Levi Rabbi Mini. Amar Rav Papa says, Haita para genuvan. Now we're switching to para. Udvacha, right? So here we're talking about whether it's going to be the cow or the bull. Udvacha b'Shabbat, and you slaughter it on Shabbat. Chayav, you're going to be paying back the 5 times. Again, we're talking about you sold it before Shabbat. You did it on Shabbat. Same halacha. You're going to be chayav, right? The 4 and 5 times. But if it was borrowed to you, which means you borrowed it, which means you had the permission to have it, and now you slaughtered it on Shabbat. Now you're going to be able to. Why? Because at the time that you slaughtered it is the time when you stole it. Because you didn't steal it until now, you borrowed it. So it's in your possession. It's allowed to be in your possession. The second you do shkita, now you stole it. So it came at the same time. You're going to be patur from paying back. He says, the son of Rabbi to Ravashi, Rav Papa parata leshmina. He comes and he says, what? Rav Papa was just coming and teaching us para. You understand? Meaning, kapara sheli. That's all you're teaching us, just about parot. What are you coming to teach us? It's the exact same thing. Elmaleh, he says, no. Rav Papa sheulat aleshmina. It's going to teach you the chidush by sheula, by borrowed. Why? I would have thought to say, since Rav Papa says, once you do meshicha, now you're going to be chayav to give the shore to eat. So to hear once you take the animal into your possession, even though you borrow it, you're chayav an onsi. Remember, a shoel is chayav an onsi. Onsim, sorry, is force majeure. Anything that would happen out of my hands, which means that I cannot do anything. Right? It's a word in French, but it came into the English language, right? And it's all the documents nowadays. If you look in all the whether you're talking about contracts and everything, force majeure. Yeah, force majeure. Right? So that's what it is. So that's honest. So he says, I would have thought to say that when you borrow the animal, now you're going to be chayav and onsi, which means that even if an honest happened, now you're chayav. So therefore, I would have thought to say that since you're already chayav and onsi, now you're chayav in everything. Mashmalan comes teach you, Papa, that it's not true. That even so, right? That's what we're saying over here. Right? The para is not going to come back to completely to the hands of the shoel to obligate him and everything. So therefore, he's going to be patur because of the kinle pedraba mine. Amar Rava comes and he says another case. What happens if the father left them a para which is borrowed? So now the children are allowed to use the para that the father had all the days of the she'ela, right? Which means, even though a shoel is chayav and onsin, right? He's allowed to give it to them because they're yuresh, the zechut of the father. So just like the father was allowed to borrow it and use this, they're allowed to continue that borrowing. Meta, if it dies, and chayavim meonsa. But now here, right, they're not chayavim meonsa. Why? Because they didn't bother it. They didn't borrow it, sorry. They didn't borrow it. It was the father. so they're not chayav in onsin, which means they have the rights of usage. Yeah, exactly. They have the rights of usage, but they're not obligated in onsin. Now, what happens if they thought it was their father's? Meaning they didn't know it was borrowed. It was borrowed. Yeah, it was borrowed. Right? So they come, they do shchita, and then they eat it. They only have to pay back the amount of money of basar bezol, cheap money, the cheap meat. That's all they have to do. Right? Right? He comes and he says, which is cheap meat. He says, what happens if the father inherited to them, right, documents, right, which basically it's they have like a shibud for the food for the chov, so now they have to pay back from that. Some people they put this on the reisha, and some people they put it on the seifa. What does that mean? Some people they put it on the reisha, right, which means that if the father gave them a parashiula and then it died, they're not chayavim in onsi. Comes Rav and he says, but if he left them properties that have guarantees, so they're going to be chayav in onsi. Some people are obligated. They said no, it's on the seifa. What does that mean? That if they thought that was their father's and then they slaughtered it and they ate it, they have to pay back cheap meat. But if right now the father left over properties with guarantees, so now they have to pay back from there. So the one that teaches on the reisha koshken on the seifa, then it's going to be the same thing. The pliga de Rav Papa, and this argues on Rav Papa, right? That's argues on Rav Papa. Rav Papa says the shoel is not chayav in onsin from the time of the borrowing, because according to Rava, he's going to be chayav during the time of the she'ela, and therefore everything was mishu'abad, everything was subjugated for the slim. So he comes and he says, but the one that teaches that it's going on the seifa, which is basically talking about that they thought it was the father's and they slaughtered in order to eat it, but not in the first case of the reisha. And it's exactly like Rav Papa, that since the shoel is not going to be chayav the onsim until the time of the ones, so therefore since he'd already died, that's it. He's not. You're not going to collect from the properties. So bishlema Rabbi Yochanan Omar Keshakish. I understand that Rabbi Yochanan does not hold like Keshakish, right? Because of the answer of Rabbi Meir, the kamukim like Rabbanan. Because basically Rabbi Yochanan wants to paskin like Rabbanan, right? Not like Rabbi Meir. At the end of the day, Rabbi Meir was the one that says that lokeu mishalem. We paskin like Rabbanan and lokeu mishalem. So I understand that our Mishnah, right, is always going. That means Rabbi Yochanan goes like Chachamim. It makes sense. But Shakish, why doesn't he say like Rabbi Yochanan? Why does he say that our case is talking about that they didn't give hatra'ah on the lashes? Just say it's going like Rabbanan. Shakish is going to answer you. If they would have given the hatra'ah, he would have been patur to pay. Meaning if somebody would have warned him, if you live with your sister, you're going to get lashes, and then he's not going to pay the money anymore. So therefore, even if they didn't do the hatra'ah, he's going to be patur milashalem. Why? Because since you could obligate malkot al biyat achoto, which means that you could give lashes for the biyah of the sister, even if you're not going to be lokeh, eno mishalem. Why? Because you could get out of it, which means sometimes you could have a case where you're going to get out of it. So because of that, even if you didn't get a hatra, you never pay. We just made a blanket rule, you never pay. To do with malkot, yes, depends if you actually gave warning or not. When this goes according to the reason. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, Amar, they said, Chayve mitot shogegim, Chayve malkuyot shogegim, right? What does that mean? Whether the people, they do it b'shogeg, right? That if they would have done it, if they would have done it purposely and with warning, they would have been chayavim mita. Or chayvim malkot, that if they would have done it b'mezid hatra, they would have been chayavim malkot, right? V'davar acher and money. Rabbi Yochanan Amar chayav. Rabbi Yochanan says they're obligated to pay the money, and then Shaki says you're going to be patur for paying the money. Right? And again, we're talking about that if you would have done it b'mezid and hatra and everything. Okay? So he comes and he says, Rabbi Yochanan, right? Amar chayav. Rabbi Yochanan says chayav, da'alo atru because he didn't give him warning. And Shaki says you're going to be patur, but since he didn't give him the warning, you're going to be patur. So even if you didn't give the warning, you're always going to be patur. Okay? And then the Gemara is going to ask, Shakish comes and he asks against Rabbi Yochanan, what about the case of the two people that are fighting and they hit a pregnant woman and they caused her a miscarriage? What does that mean? Here we're talking about the Nogef has to pay money, right? We're not talking about there that the son is mamash and ason, which means that if the woman did not die, then he has to pay the money. So it's mashma that if she did die, right? He's not going to have to pay the money, right? Because he went and he made her lose the children. So even if they didn't give him atra, right? And he's not going to be chayav mita. So it's mefurash. And even if you do an action that you're going to be chayav mita, you're patur from paying, even if they didn't give you the warning, right? And not like Rabbi Yochanan. Says the Gemara, no. It's mamash, it's a din of the ason. It's not mamash ason mamash, but it's the same din, the same halacha of ason, which means it's chayav mita, but it's not that mamash was a true death. With this, Bezat Hashem, we continue tomorrow. Bezat Hashem.